Jai Bhim, Cool Johar to everyone present here. I welcome you all to the talk Dalits and Marxism by Dr. Chandra Bhanu. Dr. Chandra Bhanu is a historian of modern India and his specific research interests are Dalit liberation movements, agrarian issues, the left politics, democracy in 20th century India. He is also interested in global histories, particularly comparing caste in India and race in North America. He completed his MA and MPhil at the Department of History, University of Hyderabad. He was a research fellow for 3 years at the Center for Modern Indian Studies, George August University at Cochin. Before that, he also taught history for pre-graduate students in Andhra Pradesh. So for the program, I now welcome Dr. Chandra Bhanu.
Thank you. Increase the volume. Okay. Is it fine? I think if I keep the mic at this level, it's fine. Yeah, it's okay. You. If I keep the mic at this level, it should be fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, BAPSA, for organizing this talk and Pramod. Thank you. So today I am going to talk about Dalits and Marxism, and particularly what I am going to deal is how Marxism can be understood as an emancipatory ideology or political philosophy, and how it evolved in India, particularly as it pertains to Dalits. Right? So this is the broader framework I am going to speak. Marxism, it's a broader political philosophy. It's very difficult for me to summarize here within 1 hour and then dealing with Dalits. So what I will do is, I'll see how it is useful or it can be used as a political philosophy for the Dalit movement. So first thing is, definitely it's a political philosophy emerged in the context of Europe, in the context of Industrial Revolution and in the modern time. Marx provided a detailed framework for the working class revolution or for the communist revolution, and in this he offered a detailed analysis of the emergence of modern capitalism in Europe, and then he went on to discussing the various aspects of working class movements. Of course, he also wrote something in his Capital about caste, and especially in his writings on India, he definitely recognized the caste, and he also observed that slavery was prevalent in Indian villages. And then it's not very clear for us to understand how Marx or Marxism can be used for anti-caste politics or Dalit politics. And then obviously over a period of time, as it evolved in the modern world politics or in Indian politics, it became kind of class politics, and class here is particularly for the larger audience. It is a ideology of economic conflict, right? However, if we read Marx in his various writings, we can also see that he was not only primarily talking of class conflict or economic deterministic class conflict. His ideology can be used for the identity-based politics. And when he was writing about blacks in the US, he wrote one famous quotation that labor cannot emancipate itself in the white skin, where in the black it is branded. So he was of the opinion that the labor movement in the US cannot be led by the whites. So he was of the opinion that the labor movement in the US should be led by the black. to put it simply, black struggles are very much part of the Marxist discourse. Though he never wrote about anti-caste struggles or Dalit movements, and as we know, it is very much comparable that black movements and Dalit movements are very much comparable, right? So we can comfortably apply the Marxist ideology to support the Dalit movement in India, since he was of the opinion that when labor or the oppression was taking place in the name of color, it should be led by the black. So in India, the oppression or the labor imbibed primarily in the caste-based structure, that is Dalit. And as we know, historically, in the modern times or in the contemporary times, the bulk of the labor in the agrarian structure or in the modern urban structure, the bulk of the labor comes from Dalits and then substantially from Muslims and tribals. There are ample number of works that shows that bulk of the labor comes from these three categories. So, for Marxist framework, Dalit movement or tribal movement or the Muslim movement cannot be kind of anti-Marxist movement. When we know that in the Indian discourse, in the Indian scholarship, Dalit movements by and large are seen as kind of anti-Marxist or anti-class struggle. And in the class struggle, when it comes to Marx, the class also understood quite widely. It's not completely economic deterministic argument. It is kind of political argument that developed over a period of time that class is only an economic deterministic category. It's a quite wider topic. He used in some other writing, when he write 18th Brumaire, he talks that the class is kind of very wider term. He used it for identifying various groups. So the point here is that whenever there is a group imbibed with certain identity and labor is predominantly coming from that category, and that is largely can be understood as class. So class is not simple economic deterministic category. So for Marxism, there is always possibility that it can support Dalit movements, it can work for tribal movements, it can work for Muslim politics. Then we see how it emerged, that Marxism in India, how it emerged or how it evolved, or I put it simply Indian Marxism, right? When I say Indian Marxism, this is the way the Marxist politicians or scholars interpreted Marxism or Indian society or Indian politics, right? So this is what I would call Indian Marxism, right? Okay. For this we have to know the brief history of Indian Marxists. When I call Indian Marxists, so this is not only the philosophical category I am using, I am also going to use them as a political category. So I would simply call the communist politicians, whoever comes with the name of Marxism, either in academia or wherever, I will simply put them as Indian Marxists, right? So first of all, we should know how the idea of Marxism or Marxist politics emerged in India. There are various stories that you might have heard, you might have read in textbook, but one thing we should first know that the Indian Marxist politics emerged primarily from upper caste politicians, kind of landholding categories, and initially they were leading Kisan Sabha movements and right movements, and when I call Kisan Sabha right movement, it's for Marxist discourse they were kind of working class, but it's not that simple. You can't simply categorize Kisan right as working class. No, one of the most important figure in the Kisan Sabha movements, N.G. Ganga, I don't know how many of you have heard of him. he came from Kama background. He was a kind of big land holding family. He had like some 300 acres of land for his family, right? So you can't simply put somebody with 300 acres of land, that is irrigated land, as part of working class, right? So Kisan Sabhas were not necessarily a working class organization. They were by and large upper caste or dominant caste organizations, mostly dominated by the dominant peasants. So you can't simply call them or categorize them as working class. So what you have seen in the early 20th century, the Marxist politics that shaped in the 20s and 30s were primarily, articulated by this Kisan Sabhas and right Sabhas, and they were not simple working class. And of course, you can also see some kind of urban middle class intellectuals, and whose primary target was not bringing Marxism to India. They want to use the term Marxism, or they want to use the Marxist discourse for India's nationalist struggle, that is to speed up the transfer of power from British to India. And their aim was definitely to establish their own rule. It's not the target of establishing a Marxist state. And in the 20s and in the 30s, and I'll also give you one of the famous Marxist from Bombay. Can anybody tell me the early Marxist politician? Dange. Thank you. So Dange wrote a book called Lenin versus Gandhi. In this book, he wrote that if there are two problems, one is reducing inequality and overthrowing the British rule, first we have to work for India's independence, then we can think of reducing inequality. That is what his suggestion in his book. And it continued well up to 1940s. And they substantially worked within Congress. The first conference of the Communist Party, I don't know how many of you know this, happened along with the Congress meeting in 1925. So they took permission from the Congress leaders to have their first Congress communist meeting within the Congress annual meeting boundaries. So there was, I think it is in Allahabad. So they organized the communist meeting in the premises of the Congress party, where they were organizing their annual conference, and they continued well up to this alliance 1945. And most of the communist leaders believed that it is good for them to be part of the Congress party. I don't know how many of you know this fact, that most of the Communist Party members were also members of the Congress Party, not before the formation of CPI, but they were also members of the Congress Party up to 1945. It might be surprising for you. They were very much members of the Congress Party. They were also members of the many provincial Congress committees as well. So that is the communist leaders, very much allied with Congress Party, and they saw Dalit movements. By this time, you should know that Dalit movements were vibrant across the country. Dalit movements were quite vibrant in Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Maharashtra, UP, in Bengal, in Punjab. In all these regions, Dalit movements were quite vibrant. And most of the Dalit movements, including Ayyankali movement in Kerala, so they were primarily not only struggling against symbolic caste inequality, they were struggling for land, they were struggling for labor issues, they were struggling for education, which means they had proper material agendas in their movement, right? However, communist parties, CPI, never tried to ally with this Dalit movement. It tried to ally with the Congress Party. Of course, they have their own reason that they want to speed up India's independence movement. So, if you see the Marxist discourse, nationalist movement cannot be the primary goal of the communists. For any communist, working class movement should be the primary goal. And in fact, the Dalit movement is very much part of the working class movement, since most of the Dalits were agricultural laborers or landless laborers. They were serfs, kind of serfs or slaves in Tamil Nadu, right? So Dalit movement, you can't simply say it's a symbolic movement or which works only for the category of social state. It also had proper agendas of land, labor, education, and then the political representation, right? So the point is, communists, when they emerged in India, they were primarily emerged as a nationalist political party than a working class political party. And of course, now we should also see what was the agricultural agenda, like what kind of land-related agendas they had in the 1940s, right? You might have heard the famous term "land to the tiller," right? So, land to the tiller. When we heard this, even in my childhood, when I heard this, I felt that it's a very revolutionary concept. I felt that land to the tiller means they must be thinking of providing land to everyone working on land, right? No, it's not that. If you read any communist documents which they officially published in the 1940s, they defined land to the tiller, or the kind of land reforms they want to achieve was they would provide land to the tenants after abolition of the Jindal system, and then they will provide wages to the agricultural laborers. So this definition you will see in any of the communist documents which they published in the 1940s. So when they were thinking of land reform, when they were thinking of the concept like land to the tiller, they were thinking that they would provide lands to the tenants and wages to the agricultural laborers. And who are these agricultural laborers in the 1930s and 1940s? They were largely Dalits, and then to some extent the tribal and other lower castes. And tenants were mostly coming from the dominant caste, something like Jats or other dominant castes in North India, or in South India they were like Reddys, Kamas, and Gaudas in Tamil Nadu. So what I am saying is that communists, when they imagined land reform, right, they imagined that they would abolish Jamindari, they would provide land to the tenants, they would provide wages. Of course, they also used some certain time this term living wages to the agricultural laborers. So which means even after achieving certain level of revolution, they called it a democratic revolution in the 1948 in one document, right? So they would achieve certain level of revolution in which there will be proper landholding class and proper agricultural laborers, who would be by and large Dalits or tribal, right? So the very communist ideology that emerged in India had this question of inequality, and they had their own version of answer which would eventually create inequality within agrarian structure. And this largely affected even when they come to power. Definitely we all know that Kerala and Bengal had substantial period of communist government, and there are ample number of studies from Ross Malik in Bengal, and in case of Kerala, Devika, there were many scholars who studied land reforms in Kerala, and Dalits were the worst beneficiaries of any land reforms implemented in Bengal or in Kerala. The point is, they were not thinking once the land abolished, Jamindari system is abolished, land would be distributed to everyone who were working on land. What they were imagining is that they would create certain level of class structure. See, a political party that's supposed to be working against class structure, it wanted to establish class structure in India, and they call it Marxism. And it is 100% anti-Marxism. It's not Marxism at all. And And they have various explanations when it comes to the democratic form of governments in Kerala or democratic forms of Bengal. They said no, if it is not democratic government, they would have done better things, right? And for this kind of argument, there is one good answer that in 1948 in Telangana, communists virtually ruled like several districts of Telangana for almost 1 year, and they tried to implement land reforms there, and the various field studies clearly showed that even in that particular case, when it is not democracy, when it is a proper communist autocratic rule, they distributed lands primarily to the tenant side. Even there, they have not distributed lands to the Dalits. Only certain wastelands were given, only limited number of Dalits, and it happened in almost all parts of British ruled provinces. The wastelands were distributed even in Madras Presidency by the British government, and it happened in many other provinces, even under the British, right? So the point is that they have not done better than what British did for Dalits in the early part of the 20th century, right? And so while it is the issue of land reform, and parallelly you also have Dalit movement speaking for land. It's not that demand for land was absent in Dalit movement. Most of the Dalit organizations that emerged before 1950 were very particular about asking land from the British government. At that time, Congress was not ruling, so they would ask British government, and in many cases they got land. So the point is, the communists, when they were in power, either in Kerala or in Bengal or in Telangana, which is kind of revolutionary. Many historians, especially Marxist historians, claim that that was a revolutionary movement of the Indian communism, and where they radically, for them, distributed lands. And the field studies and also their own documents tells us that they have not distributed lands to landless laborers who are again mostly Dalits. And apart from that, when I'll go to the next level, and this is not end of the Indian Marxists dealing with Dalits. This is only what they have not done. We have to ask what they have done when Dalits worked out for land, when they try to get land on their own. And there were various instances when Dalits tried to get land. There were violent incidents occurred in Andhra or in Telangana or in many places, and they comfortably supported Kisan Sabhas, and Kisan Sabhas would support rights. And there were even in Andhra in 1945, when Scheduled Caste Federation wanted to work out for when Dalits tried to occupy certain wasteland, there was a violent incidents happened, and there was conflict between Kamma Rais and Dalit laborers. And this was in 1945. And Scheduled Caste Federation supported obviously agricultural laborers, and initially communists kind of expressed their solidarity. When it comes to the elections by within next year in 1946, they have simply created a discourse that Scheduled Caste Federation, that is the party founded by Ambedkar, was not cooperating with communists, especially on the issue of violence between Dalits and the communists. And they created that it was Scheduled Caste leaders who ignored the Kamma's violence against Dalits, and they systematically produced a discourse in its own newspaper saying that Scheduled Caste Federation is not something working for Dalit labor. And in fact, in 1945, in the same village, the name of that village is Hovali, and in that village, Scheduled Caste Federation organized its provincial conference, and Communist Party wrote against the Scheduled Caste Federation, saying that it is ignoring the conflict between Dalits and the Kamaras. So meaning they want to produce a discourse that Scheduled Caste Federation or Dalit movement. Of course, they also wrote about other Dalit organizations in this period that they were ignoring the land. In their own manifesto, in their own party document, they created a category of tenant and agricultural laborer, and they want to keep, and I won't say they want to keep, but they were imagining agricultural laborer as just an agricultural laborer, and they would produce a discourse that Dalit movements are not worrying about the land business, right? And while this is the story of Dalit movements at the provincial level, if you read Ambedkar at this time, in the party document of Scheduled Caste Federation in 1942, he had this agenda that there should be separate Dalit hamlet with a proper percentage of land allotted to it so that there will be no Dalit labor. So Ambedkar was imagining all Dalit laborers would become certain form of farmers or cultivators. And again in 1946 when he wrote States and Minorities, he proposed that agriculture should become the state industry. There would be no cultivator owning land and everyone should become the tenant of the state. So in both the cases, Ambedkar had this particular vision of making every Dalit as a farmer. He wanted to make them as agriculturers, not simple agricultural laborers. But this is quite contrary to the CPI's discourse in the 40s and 30s. So, the CPI's discourse in the 1940s, when it comes to the land person, I am not talking about what they have worked against caste. So, it's all, usually we assume that communists ignore caste person and they primarily work in land area or the class parties, right? They have not done class parties. They have done petty bourgeoisie politics. Petty bourgeoisie politics means they have worked for land holding upper caste, land holding dominant caste at the cost of Dalit laborers. They did anti-class politics throughout 40s, 50s. And while this is the story of anti-caste and anti-class politics of the communists in India, in various instances, they also inflicted violence against Dalits. I'll give you two good examples. In the 1940s, when Hyderabad Nizam Andhra Mahasabha, so it was a communist organization because in the Nizam's rule, Communist Party as such was banned. So they were working in the name of Hyderabad Nizam Andhra Mahasabha, and they were mobilizing the landholders against Nizam. And obviously Dalits, being landless laborers or kind of semi-slaves, they have not taken part in this organization. So there were various instances that whenever Dalits did not took part in their registrations or rallies, they were attacked by the Nizam Andhra Mahasabha activists. Which means, if Dalits did not take part in the activities of the Communist Party, they would be attacked by the communists. And this is something you might have seen in any province. And then there is something that I should bring now. We might have heard, I'll slightly move away from this main story. We might have heard that India in post-colonial times witnessed several violent incidents. Probably you might have heard Sikh riots, anti-Sikh riots in 1984. You might have heard Godhra riots in 2002, or communal conflict in 1992 at the time of Bombay, which is mass demolition. In these incidents, definitely some thousands of people died. In Sikh riots, it is believed that some 5,000 were died in 1992, some hundreds of Muslims or some Hindus died. In Godhra, the number goes something like 2,500. And we are well informed about them through our media and academia. But we have not informed about one incident through our media or our great Marxist scholar, right, in India, about one incident in which several thousands of Dalits were massacred in a span of 1 week. Can anybody guess what is it? Marriage massacre, right? And who were the culprits in the story? It is the communist government of Bengal. They have, they wanted to take lands from the Namashudra settlers in Sundarban region, and when they did not allow the communist government to do so, they sent their party workers along with some goons, and they attacked in 1979 when communist government came in proper democratic manner in 1977. They systematically attacked the 4 Dalit hamlets in Marijapi region, and by end of that month, the 4 Dalit hamlets were completely wiped out from the map itself. By 1980s, nobody knows that there were 4 Dalit hamlets in the Marijapi region, and the number of death toll was unimaginable. It is estimated that almost like 4,000 Dalit families were massacred, and some 200 odd numbers were survived, and it's only explored first by Rosmalik, not by any great scholar who would write about Godhra, who would write about Sikh rights or any kind of wrongdoings by the right-wing political parties, but they would never write about this Marijapi massacre. And we all know that all the greatest Marxist scholars came from Bengal. All the historians, political scientists, whoever you name in history or any other discipline, right? They came from Bengal. And it was in the 1979, the only political activist who consistently wrote was Kanshiraw. In his Oppressed India magazine, he wrote consistently about it. But not any other political figure or intellectual figure at that time or later. Again, only it was in the 90s, Rose Malik brought this story out. And then, of course, now we have several memoirs coming out in the last 4-5 years or so, right? So, my point is that the communist parties or Indian communists, or we can call them Indian Marxists, when they imagined a revolution in India, they have never imagined that would bring equality for Dalits or tribals or for other oppressed communities like Muslims. They were primarily imagining that they would bring India's independence, and then they would benefit the tenant class or petty bourgeoisie agrarian structure. This was their main agenda in the 1940s or in the 1930s, and it properly influenced the Communist Party's course in the coming decades, right? Okay, then you would ask that, okay, these are kind of bourgeoisie political parties. What about the radical left wing, that is kind of Naxalites or CPIML, right? People's for Growth. Yeah, People's for Growth definitely claims itself as a radical political party which works for the landless laborers, attacked landlords. However, we have several stories, especially by the erstwhile CPIML leaders themselves. I don't know how many of you have heard about K.G. Satyamurthy. He was one of the founders of CPIML, and he was expelled from CPIML. He was one of the first 3 figures when it was established in 1969 to be an organizer, and he was expelled when police were chasing him when he was arrested and when he was not protected by the CBI-ML, and on the suspicion of that he revealed some stories about CBI-ML, the police, they expelled him. And later it is revealed by K.G. Satyamurthy himself and by his niece. I don't know how many of you read Sujata Gidla's work, Handsome on the Elephant. And we come to know what kind of caste practices were there within CBI-ML. That is, the lower caste Naxals were given to the lower rank position. The upper caste figures get easily the higher rank position, and they were always looked down. They were looked with suspicion. They were treated kind of lower caste people there properly. And then when K.G. Satyamurthy, after being there with them for several decades, would become the chief of the CBI-ML, there was this discussion and he was expelled. So it was not only on the suspicion of that he had revealed something to the police, but there were already certain groups of people thinking about him negatively. So it was easy for them to expel from the CBI-ML, right? So the story of Indian Marxism as it evolved in India was not a story of Marxism at all. So this is my point. And the history of Dalit movement would reveal that the very class politics were very much part of Dalit movement. So Dalit movements were not anti-class politics. It is only the discourse built by the Marxist scholars in India, especially by those who had certain level of relationship with the CPI and CPM. They created a discourse that Dalit movements, including Ambedkar, were kind of anti-class politicians. Right? So when you read Ambedkar, when you read the history of Dalit movement, they were equally doing class politics. And if you read Marx, he would say that whatever Ambedkar did is Marxism. He would never say that it is against Marxism. Because he would expect some Dalit leadership to lead the working class politics, not somebody coming from the upper caste politicians. He would say the land holding caste group cannot send their leader to lead the working class. So if you go by Marxism, Dalit movements are proper Marxist movements, not the so-called Marxist political parties that they did caste politics throughout their career, and they consistently created a discourse against Ambedkar, against Dalit movement and Dalit political parties, including Kanshiram, that they would say that, oh, these people are doing casteist politics. And when they do the casteist politics, or any bourgeoisie political party they won't say it as casteist politics. They would give it something else. They would call it bourgeoisie politics or progressive politics or something XYZ. But it is not caste politics. Who are dominating any political party, the BJP, Congress, or any regional political party, take any example. They are all dominated by some upper caste group in their respective regions. But none of them were properly portrayed as caste political parties by the Marxist scholars. But it is only the lower caste political parties, say something like BSP or something like Ambedkar, would appear as casteist politicians. Right? So, the Marxist scholarship which emerged from 40s to till date, who comes with the tag of Marxist scholar, would preferably say that Ambedkar or any other political party established by Dalits is casteist political, but not this upper caste political party. So, at the end, we have to think Marxism should be used as a political philosophy, an ideology for Dalit movement, but not under the leadership of this upper caste political leader. If we go by Marx himself, it needs to be deconstructed or destroyed, the Marxist politics in India, and they have to be rebuilt by following Marx, by following Ambedkar, and building the proper Indian social analysis. And it is there already in this Dalit movements and tribal movements, in all these movements. But what we are missing in this discourse is Marxism is something looked as an antagonistic to the Dalit movement or antagonistic to the caste politics or lower caste politics or anti-caste politics. But it is a proper discourse created by the left themselves or Marxist scholars themselves. Since they have not followed the Marxist ideas, they would easily portray Ambedkar or anybody as anti-Marxist. If Marx comes to alive, he would say that Ambedkar is more Marxist than any of Indian communist political leaders in this country. So that's where I would stop at the moment. Now you can ask if you have any questions.
Floor is open for questions.